Good Woch. Welcome to tonight's Shir, Motzei Shabbos Vayikra. So, again, to start with a story. Siddur Shemaisa. So, I'm going to recall a story with a Baal Shem Tov that there was once a couple who had a son who drifted away from Yiddishkeit. And he came one time to his parents and he says to his parents, he's decided to get married to this and this non-Jewish girl. And there's nothing to talk about, not negotiable. And her parents were obviously tzavarochen. And the father went to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov says to the father, could you persuade your son to come by visit me? And so, but I won't try to dissuade him, just to come and visit me. So the father comes back to the son who knew of the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe, and he says not to try to dissuade him, but just to visit him. Okay, fine. So he comes to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov meets him. He says, first thing, don't try to dissuade me. I've made my mind up. No, I'm just here. He takes out from his drawer a tal's cotton, and he asks the boy, please, I'm asking you to commit yourself to wear this on a daily basis. Well, he thought he's going to get a whole telling off, and here he's just to wear the tzitzis. So he says, yeah, no problem. And he goes away from the Baal Shem Tov, and it comes the Baal Shem Tov had told the father, just go ahead with the proceedings of the wedding. Comes the day of the wedding, the procedure, wedding, and then there's a party. And the groom is with his friends, and they are drinking and celebrating, and the father is standing on the edge of the hall, doesn't know where to put himself. And as they are in this how do you say, in a shikadika state of mind. So then one of them says, I've got an amazing idea. In the celebration of the moment, let's strip. And yeah, great idea. Yeah, shikra goyim. And then one of them says, but the first one has to be the man of the evening, the chassan. Yeah. So he starts taking off his, yeah, I said, sure. He starts taking off his tuxedo, then he takes off his shirt, and then mitamol they see that he's wearing that tal's cotton. Oh, you're a Jid like all the rest of them. And they start insulting him and start throwing stuff at him. And poor fella, he sees his father at the edge of the room. He says, Tati, let's get out of here as fast as we can. And that was the end of that marriage. And so the tzitzis saved him. And there's a similar story in the Gemara about the tzitzis being a salvation from a case of a similar thing, that when a person was being seduced to do something wrong, and his tzitzis kind of slapped him in the face, and that was a reminder, and he did not succumb to the temptation. So there is this inyan. I'm saying this story, Makesha, to the second thing which we have on our list today, and then I'll come back to the first item. And the second thing is about the minhag of having tzitzis, the preference to have tzitzis kofel shmoina. Now the tzitzis threads are made up of 8 strands. So the finer tzitzis, the better quality tzitzis, you have the tzitzis are always twisted threads. That's halacha. But each of the two sides of the two main strands are made up of 4 strands, and so you have kofel shmoina. And for years I've been intrigued, where does this kofel shmoina come from? And in passing, I was browsing this particular sefer Minchas Aaron, and here he refers to that from the Shalom, Kitzah Shalom, Shekein Roy Las, so is Kechesh Ben Kanfe HaChayes Shehem Reish Nun Vov, and he says it's not in the Kisvei Arizal, but yeah, right. So now he does give a reference to the Chidah. So this is from the Birkei Yosef. So it's within the Birkei Yosef, the several sections. So Shiurei Bracha is one of the sections within the Birkei Yosef. Used to be a separate sefer. In the newer editions, they've got them all together. So he writes Minyan Chute Hatzitzis. Now the Rambam writes Afilu Hoya Hachut Koful Miches Chutin. The Rambam, when he talks about making tzitzis, he says even if the strand is made up of 8 strands, the Rambam in passing says it's also okay. He doesn't say you should. He just says it's also okay. But Omar Harav Oider Hatimni, or Temani Shekain Mitzvah Min HaMuvchi. Although the Rambam says it in passing that it's also kosher, actually there is a benefit of having the threads made up of 8, because when you have 8 made up of 8, then you have 32 tzitzis. Sorry, you have 32 strands, and 8 times 32 equals 256. And that is a remez to the wings of the chayos, the wings of the malochim, which surround the kisei hakovod, the heavenly throne, and therefore it's appropriate to have your tzitzis should have in them the number 256. Hagol le'echad kodesh ksaviyat. So the Birkei Yosef, the Chidah writes, I saw this a comment and a note from a holy person, and but he doesn't go in more detail. On the bottom right, we have a sefer called actually it's a sefer Rivid Hazor, I think it's contemporary, quoting a sefer Mat'amim, which is a well-known sefer. I have the sefer. It's going the reasons for mitzvahs. What's the reason for kofel shmoina? Because then you'll have effectively, if you have 8 strands within each of the 8 of your strands on each corner, so then you have 64 strands in each corner. Altogether, 4 times 64 will equal 256. And that is a remez to the Kanfei HaChayis, which we saw already, the number of 256 wings. How do you get the number of 256? So now he gives us the detail. Kiyodua, that you've got the heavenly throne is surrounded with Arba Chayos, is surrounded with 4 beings. Shoy and Nesher, perhaps that's what you're referring to. Each of these Chayos, which are surrounding the Merkava, the heavenly chariot, each one has got 4 ponim. So 4 times 4 is now 16. And each of those ponim has also 4 ponim. That 4 times 16, help me, is 56, yeah? No, 66. It's 66. The chol ponim arba knafayim, and each of those ponim has got 4 wings. So therefore, 4 times 66 brings you to 256. That's the Romesh to the Kanfei Tzitzis. Okay, so I haven't given you an explanation, but I've given you a source. There is something in the Tzitzis which has a remes dafka to the number of 256, and that's got to do with the wings of the Malochim. And it seems right. So now I want to scroll down the next thing, and that is I actually had maftir today. We had a granddaughter born on Wednesday, and Thursday the name was given Rivka. Bahashkacha Protis, that's my mother's name, and Bahashkacha Protis is my mother's, was born on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, so the baby was born Erev Rosh Chodesh and named on the birthday of her namesake. And so was Olam Maftir. And here you had the posuk Ronu Shamayim. So I saw this Ronu, the number of Reish Nun Vav. It triggered something in my mind. There's something about the word Ronu. We saw about the two, and what really was in my mind, though, I remembered Ronu Liyaakov, singing for Yaakov, Ronu Liyaakov. Now we've got 2 psukim here. One is that today's Haftarah is in Yeshaya, whereas the Ronu Liyaakov is in Yirmiyah, and so the idea of Ronu. And now on the right of the screen, a little bit more about this number Ronu. I've mentioned this before, perhaps. a Sefer lexicon of Kabbalah terms is the Sefer Koheles Yaakov, and he talks about the number Ronu, about the what is this Ronu, and he says the following: the Ronu in Kabbalah is a remes to twice the number 120. Shem Elikim, 5 letters. So if you have three letters, you can make it into 6 permutations. If you have 4 letters, you can have 24 permutations. If you have 5 letters, you can have 120 permutations. So you've got Elikim, so Yud Kei Vav Kei. Well, let's not go into that way. Adni's got 24. Elikim has got 120 tzirufim. In other words, you can put the 5 letters in 120 different sequences. Twice Kufchof equals 240. And that's the gematria of this Lamed Resh Yud, which is a klippa, which is seducing for znus. He tells us to look up the entry of Lamed Resh Yud. I didn't look it up. And the power to annul that seduction is with the Yud Vov. Now, Yud Vov 16, this is also going to come up when it comes to Pesach, when we pour off the wine in by the makis. So what's the significance of pouring off 16 times? It's Dom Veish Simers Oshon, the makis, 10 makis, and then it's Achmadash Ba'achav. So there, I believe the Alter Rebbe there mentions also that this is Al Pi Kabbalah. The 16 is Yud Vov Heichov, is the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the sword of Hashem Kivyochel, and this is related to the words Ki Malochov Yitzaveloch, the 4 words of Ki Malochov Yitzaveloch. He will command his angels to protect you. The 4 words of Ki Malochov Yitzaveloch, the last letters spell Yud Vov Heichov, and that is the power of Hashem, the sword of Hashem giving protection. So come back to our discussion here, that there is the Kufchof, which is, he says that's a power of seduction for improper behavior. And then there's this sword which Hashem gives, which is the number of 16. And so 16 with 240 equals 256. So then that's the Yaakov, that's the power of Yaakov, who is able to be mevatel the seduction to znus, and that is the meaning of the Al Pi Kabbalah, the secret of Ronu leYaakov Simcha, that the power of Ronu is the power of Yaakov to give the Simcha instead of being seduced to Avodah Zarah, to znus, is giving the power Ein Erech Tzitzis. So he refers to the tzitzis very briefly. I did look it up, and tzitzis he doesn't discuss. But we're seeing here, just to wrap this up, I know it sounds very Kabbalistic. It is Kabbalistic. But we are seeing here that there is a significance in the number of Reish Nun Vov, and it is a power of protection. And that's got to do with the union of tzitzis, that the tzitzis is a protection, as we said, the story of the Baal Shem Tov, and the story I mentioned in the Gemara. And so the tzitzis have got a certain shmira and to protect the eat from going in the wrong direction. And that's the significance of having kofel shmoyne dikat tzitzis. Okay, let's come back to being that it's just coming from Beis Nissen, and it's the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Nishmos Eden of the Rebbe Rashab. So we have here a vort on the Haggadah. I gave a shir on this. I told you a few times about this Koilel Iyun Tefillah, and so I gave a shir on the Haggadah, and one of the first things I shared is the following. I believe that this is that the Rebbe's Haggadah was published in Tov Shin Vov. It means that now this year is the 80th year since the Haggadah was published. Okay, so now we have a word in the Haggadah that we have Lashon Habo in the section of Heilach Ma'anyo. So we have Lashon Habo Be'aradi Yisrael. In the coming year, we should be, this year, Hashat O'och, this year we are here. Next year, we should be in Aradi Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael. Hashatu Avdin, this year we are slaves, servants. Next year, Shana Haba B'nei Chayrin. We should be free people. We're all familiar with this. And then we're also familiar that this Vort, which is written in the Rebbe's Haggadah, that the Rebbe Rashab would say the first one, he would pronounce Lashona Habo'o, and the second one he would pronounce Lashona Habo'o. So he would pronounce the first one that the year which has come already, Habo'o, means that it's the one. In other words, if it be Tovshin Pevov, it'd say this year, Lashona Habo'o, this year which has already come, already arrived. This year we should be in Eretz Yisrael. It comes the second time, Lashona Habo'o, B'nei Chayrin. The coming year we should be B'nei Chayrin, Tovshin Pei Zayin. And begs the question, why, when it comes to coming to Eretz Yisrael, he wants it this year? When it comes to B'nai Chayrin, he's happy to leave it to next year. And I looked around. I mean, this is a vote which has been chazed many times, but I've looked around now, and I don't remember seeing, and they say, I have here, this is from my Siddur, Rei Habiyah B'Shimas HaYoimin, Ani Geres HaKodesh, but I didn't find the beer, even looking up. So I want to suggest the following, that the Rebbe Rashab, in his intense avodah, is saying the following. Mashiach, right away. Tovshim Pevov, we should have in Barad Yisrael. Comes to B'nei Chayrin, Hashata Avdin. Now we have the opportunity of Aveda. In the future, there will be a further stage. In the further stage in Yemei Moshiach, there's going to be a stage where there won't be the challenge of Aveda. And so the Rebbe Rashab is saying, Hashata Avdin, now we are in the stage of Aveda. Lashon Habo at a later stage. Don't worry, we'll get there, but that's later on. B'nei Chayrin. That's my suggestion. If anyone has a better shot, something which has been published already 80 years. What's the significance of the change over from one way to the other? I'll be happy to hear a different shot, and I'll be happy to share it also if I'm duly convinced. Okay, let's move on. They have a story of a person, a Lubavitcher German, who goes every Friday to an old age home. He puts on tefillin with a gentleman there. And one Friday he was a bit later than usual, and the fellow says, "But I'm sorry, I already had Kiddush." In the old age homes, they tend to make everything early. People go to sleep early in the old age homes. And so they made a Ma'ariv early and Kiddush early. And so this man says, I already had Kiddush. So here's the question, can you put on tefillin after he's already had Kiddush? So it's something which is kind of discussed in Shulchan Aruch. This is in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch Siman Lamed. And the source which talks about this is the Trumas Hadeshet. And so, meanwhile, we're talking about on a weekday. If someone had forgotten and hadn't put on tefillin all day, then he davened Ma'ariv, and then he realized he davened Ma'ariv early, whilst it's before sunset. There are those who say that he may not put on tefillin now, because he has already changed this status of this moment to become Nacht, to become night. And once it's night, it's Zman Shchiva, the time for sleeping. It's a time for saying Shema of night. And if you're going to put on tefillin, so you're making it back into day. So you are got contradicting voices. If you hadn't davened, that's a different story. But yesh there are those who disagree with this. And that is referring to the Shach in Hilchos Nida. It talks about that even if you've already davened Ma'ariv early, been Mikabel Shabbos, there are things which have to be done by day, and they can still be done as day, even though it's already after Kabbalah Shabbos or after an early Ma'ariv. In other words, he's differentiating between this, could we say, the artificial Nacht by davening Ma'ariv and the real nacht or nightfall, which has got to do when the sun has set. The sun hasn't set, so you can still do the mitzvahs hayoim. And so this is going to be relevant in many in Yonim. It could be a similar thing with the bris, etc., etc. We would paskin like at least lechumra, we would paskin like the shach that even though you're daven, you already had kiddush, you can still put on tefillin if you didn't put on today. Perhaps to say without a bracha, because according to the Trumas Hadeshin, he says that you shouldn't. It's already night, Laila, so don't say a bracha, but do the mitzvah. Let's move on. Okay, which kind of brings us to the next story. Now, as I last week, and my apologies for not putting on the time for tonight's shir on the program for the evening. And that's because last week it was a pre-recorded shir as I was Shabbos. I spent Shabbos in Wyoming. We had a bris of a grandson. And so I took off the time for the when the shir starts, and then I forgot to put it back for this week. But Lineda, try to remember for next time. But here, listen to what happened. We had the bris was done there. We didn't have a minion for the bris. I called upon him, Baruch Hashem, and he's named after my father, Olav Shalom. I was very pleased with that. And then in the afternoon, the Moyle says, "Do you recognize me?" So I said, "No." So he says, "Well, I'll tell you a story. Several years ago, you got a phone call whether a bris could be done 10 minutes after sunset. And you said no. And I'm upset with you," he says to me, "because to this very day, that child did not have a bris." So I remember this story. It was someone who's a shliach somewhere in Europe, and he brought out this. I didn't know who the moil was. He brought out a moil who had done brisen for children. He's also qualified to do for adults. So he had done some adults also. And then I get this frantic call. It's a few minutes after sunset. There's a mother here with a child, and she wants to have the child have a bris, but it's after Shkia. I do have a bit of leeway after Shkia, about 4 minutes. But this was 10 minutes. I said 10 minutes is too late. You can't do a bris 10 minutes after the Shkia. So the Moya was saying, "What about Rabbeinu Tamzman?" So I said, this is about 5 years later. Yeah, the bris was in the non bris was in Europe, and I meet this Moyle in Wyoming last Shabbos afternoon, and Ashkocha. So I said to him that the Rabbeinu Tamzman, Motzei Shabbos, I do Melacha before Rabbeinu Tam's Nacht. So how can I start now coming and say I'm going to rely on Rabbeinu Tam's when I don't subscribe to this at all? The Alter Rebbe's Lashonis about this particular, not Chas v'Sholom about Rabbeinu Tam or about other things, but Legabe this inyan of Zmanim. The Alter Rebbe says Neged Achush or Pli Nisgavo. It's very, very strong language. I didn't feel you could rely on Zman of Rabbeinu Tam for making a bris and bein hashmoshes. But be that as it may, he wasn't very impressed. And what happened then was this woman, they didn't do the bris, and she came home and told her husband, who is not Jewish. He says, "What are you talking about? No way, I'd never agree to such a thing." And that was the end of that story so far. So here's the question: was right or wrong to block this bris? And no, but everything is Eibishter runs the world, and this woman came 10 minutes after the Zman. She could have come earlier, and Eibishter made her come then, and could have been that the local shliach could have called a different rov, and he would have told him different psak. But he came to me. It's everything's Vashkocha Protis. Why the Eibishter ran it that way, we'll find out one day, or we won't find out. Doesn't matter. But now we're just looking at the Inyan. What if it would ever happen again? What would be the answer? So actually, this situation is addressed by the late Rav Wozner in Shevet Shuvas Halevi. And there was a Moyle living in Manchester. And actually, he would travel to the Soviet Union or the former Soviet Union, and he'd go there to do Brisson. And he asked Rav Wozner two things. One is about, well, about doing bris after dawn before sunrise. So lichatchila, a mitzvah which is to be done by day, should be done after sunrise. It's only but Shas Adchak that we do the mitzvah before sunrise. Let's say we're reading Megillah, whatever it may be. But in respect to that, Rav Osno says it's no problem, and he understands he's traveling to this country, and he's got a limited amount of time. If he can do another bris before sunrise, that means that there's another candidate, another Yid has had a bris, so he can pack in his day an extra bris. So it was important to him, and Rav Osno said that's okay. That's the first part of the tshuva. Then he talks about after Shkia and asking how many minutes after sunset could I do a bris. So he says you're not very clear, and also you cannot compare the zone of after sunrise or after dawn till sunrise. That is after dawn is called day. This is interesting. It's not symmetrical. Halacha, the day begins from dawn. And the day ends by Tzesach Kechovim, and already according to Goinim, Tzesach Kechovim is 20 minutes, whatever, after sunset. And after that is Laila Gemura, so it's not symmetrical. Anyway, so he says after Shkia is already Sofik Laila, we follow the Shittas Goinim, that it's Sofik Ben Hashmoshes, and that starts right after the first Shkia, and therefore you can't do a bris then. Those who follow totally Rabbeinu Tam, if so, then they have another hour. But I've written several places, Rav Osno is writing, that nowadays, predominantly, the Kehillah follow the Geonim, Allah Hachmir, and even those who follow Rabbeinu Tam will still follow the Geonim Lahachmir. And then he quotes from the Shagas Arya that if you did a bris balaylo, afilu b'di'evet, it's not a mitzvah. You haven't done the mitzvah. So then he says, no, you can't do a bris ben hashmoshes. So that's Rav Osno's psak, and so I feel a little bit off the hook. Now, then Rav Osno goes further. So I'm not totally off. Medina, I do concede that if there's a concern, that if the bris is not going to be done today, it won't be done at all. And even if it's totally nightfall, if it's pitch black, if it's going to be remain oral, better to do a Mila at night. You won't be fulfilling the mitzvah of Mila, but he won't be an oral. And then and he says, enough kimina. If it's a question of time, even if it'll be waiting a few months or years, then don't do it. But if it's totally, he says, sorach, if it's going to prolong delay, his mulling over the thought. And I'd like just to add, if you say you can do a bris balaylo and he's not going to be an oral, call in a goyish doctor also. A goyish doctor he'll not be an oral. He won't be an oral if he would take a goy also. So call upon him. That's the other side of it. He's saying that if it's never going to happen, otherwise, then he does allow doing it balaylo, and that's really depends on the circumstances. And right, let's move on. Now we have here also a related bris question which came my way this past week, and I discussed it with the Moyle last Shabbos. In some countries of Europe, they are the laws are that you can't use a regular moil, as in Hamish Yid as such, unless he's qualified as a doctor, as have a medical qualification. So the shluchim there, when they need a moil, they bring in there are from doctors, and they'll bring in a from doctor. There's a family who are expecting a child in the near future, and they say that this hit and run type of moil, they're not really interested. They want to have someone who will be there tomorrow also, rather than getting on the plane that evening. And the liberal community in that town, in that country, they also have the Indian of Milo. So they've got a doctor, as a liberal Jew, we can use those labels. And he's trained to do a bris the way they would do. That would involve using a clamp, and he would use a local anesthetic. I don't know what else. Okay. The I hope you're not eating malava malka now. The clamp is a invention. Was someone called Bronstein. There's been another type. It clamps on the Orla skin is soft, and it clamps it so tight that it cuts the circulation totally, and it's as if you're cutting into dead skin. And there is a lot of objection to the use of the clamp, including letters of the Rebbe against it. What would happen if a meal was done with a clamp? Does they need to have atofas dambris, something which is into shaila? Some say you should do atofas dambris, but that was the question. Should he now? If you have a Jewish moil, even if it's not Shomer Shabbos, the Mila will be a valid, will be kosher Mila. So should he recommend they use this liberal moil, or should he say you're an Israeli couple, in due course you're probably going to visit the Holy Land, and you'll do the bris a month or two, a few months later, but you do it with a kosher moil? This was the question. And this moil says to me from his experience, when it's not a from Yid who's doing the bris, there's likely that they will not cut off enough skin, and the Mila will not be a kosher act of Mila altogether. So he was quite emphatic that not to go with the non-from moil, and instead take a wait around till they have the opportunity, if they, especially if they are the kind of people who do travel to Eretz Yisrael, to delay it and to do it properly. Okay, that's the position which he shared, and probably other Moyalim would concur with that. Let's move on. So this is all got to do with last week's experiences. Now, just now, on the last few days, someone asked me about a mobile kitchen. Sorry, I don't show the picture. It's got like, you have these snack vans or the ice cream vans. Do those vans need to have a mezuzah? My response was that no one lives there, so therefore it doesn't need to have a mezuzah. But what about what they call in America RV, which is a kitzur for recreational vehicle, or we would call it a motorhome? Do those things need to have a mezuzah, especially if a person lives there for a long time? So he quotes here, this is from my favorite mezuzah sefer, Seichel Tov. He quotes here from another contemporary that an auto, which is a Hebrew word for a vehicle, which is used for living in a steady way, possibly is chayiv mezuzah, even though it is actually travels. And then he quotes from the Chelkas Yaakov, Rav in Zurich, I believe. He writes also that a caravan where people are living bikvias does require a mezuzah, even as it is mobile. And yes, so if there are people are living in a mobile home, yeah, for as a oifun kavua, it's not just for a couple of days, then it seems that they would have to have a mezuzah. Let's move on, but still the kitchen is like a shed. Does a store need to have a storage area need to have a mezuzah? So if it's a store which is like part of the house, and even if it's outside, but let's say if you don't have enough space, you put the stuff in the shed. That kind of shed, which is an extension of the house, should have a mezuzah. But if it's for storage, not for household out, not for food items, etc., not for dishes, it's for bikes and for garden tools, then that kind of shed doesn't need to have a mezuzah. Okay, what else do we have here? So a couple of questions. Someone's asking, do what she wants to prepare a sweetened coffee essence for Pesach. She wants to prepare it before Yom Tov. Does she have to boil and filter the sugar and the coffee? So she's buying both coffee and sugar with a Pesach hechsher. and she wants to make it into some kind of syrup, I understand, before Pesach. And my understanding is that you do not need to strain it. You don't have to boil it. You could, let's say, if you wanted to, a practical thing, if you wanted to make ice cream with sugar before Pesach, you could buy kosher Pesach sugar. But you could mix it. Well, once the idea of bottle bashishim is not necessarily through cooking. Once it's blended into a mush, then bittul bashishim takes place. So the idea that in case chas v'sholem there's a speck of mochametz in the sugar, it will become bottle bashishim in the ice cream, even if the sugar wasn't boiled. And it's the same thing with this coffee essence that she wants to make before Yom Tov, so it'll become bottle bashishim without boiling, without filtering. Once it's become all one liquid, it's become bottle, if there is any need for bittul. The next thing which we have, so I don't have a mocker for this. This is someone from France asked me. Till now, they've been machmir. This is one of the beautiful things I must say about the Reb Mule Azimov and his Rebbetzin, that they train their Balchuvas, they push them to go all the way. And any chumras which are noyag in Chabad, didn't tell them, oh, for you it's okay to do this. No, they pushed them to be machmir in everything. So you have all the Lubavitcher chumras they are following, and if they are from Tunisia, so they also don't have sugar because in Tunisia didn't have sugar. So even though Lubavitch, lots of people do have sugar, but they had the chumras of both. Okay, so now one of the chumras which many people had is to use coarse salt. The advantage of coarse salt is that you can sort it through, you can check it, and to see if there's any foreign bodies there. And now this coarse salt is not available with the hechsher in their community. But you can get running salt, regular running salt, which with a hechsher. So here's the dilemma. What's better, to have coarse salt without a hechsher, or to have running salt, which just does have a hechsher? So they asked me for my advice, and I don't have a source for this. Just my svara was that you say you're going to get the coarse salt, and you're going to check it. Right. I mean, you're limited how well you can check things, and there may be something will be overlooked. Here you have a hechsher, which is kind of take responsibility that there's no sandwiches eaten nearby. You buy coarse salt in a marketplace, you don't know who's been there, etc. Hopefully, with a hechsher situation, that's monitored to some degree, and therefore the likelihood of a mistake is going to be less in the hechsher salt free running, less likely to have a mistake than to have in the salt which you buy without a hechsher and start picking through it. Not saying this with a absolute position, but that's my inclination. Okay, we have another couple of things on our list, and one is about the tefillah which we say after saying the Nasi. Someone's asking me a little bit more about it. They looked in my siddur, I didn't find any comment on it. So the answer is very simple, that the hirotzen for the Nasi is not from the Alter Rebbe. It's not in the Alter Rebbe siddur. And actually, going back 100 and something years ago, it wasn't so clear that in Chabad they said the Yehirotzen. But the Rebbe, we have in Hayom Yom that the Rebbe, we do say the Yehirotzen, the whole story with Ramesh Horenstein, which is in Hayom Yom for a couple of days ago. So now, so where does this Yehirot? So there's a minig of reading the Nasi. I believe the Alter Rebbe mentions it in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Tov Chavtes or Tov Lama, somewhere around there. And because of this, we have also that we don't say Tachnun because together with the 12 days of the Nasi and with the Pesach, so therefore we have a whole majority of the Chodesh, so we don't say Tachnun. That is mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. But the Tefillah said afterwards is actually not mentioned in Shulchan Aruch. The one source is given, so in the I get a chassid over Sikha that today in Chelik Lamed Beis, the Sikha all about the saying of the Nasi. And the Rebbe gives a reference to Kav HaYoshor, Perik Peches, and that's what you have on the screen. And then you also have, he gives a reference to Mikdash Melech, which I'll come to in a moment. And they bring this tefillah. And what is this? They're now actually looking at this tefillah. We're saying it now for 12 days running. It's got kind of, I'd say, three sections. The first part is about the Tzipporin HaMatzavtzefin, and then Ben Shaloilam Tachnis Ayil, and then there's another Yehirotz, Shabim Ani Me'avducha Mishevet Ploini Shekarosi Hashanosi Hayom. I see these as two or three sections. And the first part, so here the Kav HaYoshor talks about the prayer for neshamas. And in the winter, the beginning of the winter, comes Elul time, we go to the Beis Olam and we visit the neshamas and we daven for them. And but a Chodesh Nisan, then it's a greater light, Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei Zal HaSeder, and therefore we don't go to the Beis Olam, we don't fast, etc. And so then our tikkun for the neshamas is by saying that tefillah after saying the nasi. So he quotes here that the Shalosh says about saying the nasi, and to say it tefillah ktsara. Now I looked up the Shalosh. He doesn't bring this tefillah, but he brings this. The Kav HaYoshor brings this tefillah yirotzim milfonecha. And the Rebbe talks about in the Sikha. The Rebbe talks about the second part of the tefillah, how we every Yid has a shaykhis to each of the 12 Shvatim, some to one more directly and to the others less directly. And we're asking and we are assured that we are going to get through our tefillah a shaykhis to all of those neshamas, which gives us the schuyos, which to carry out Torah mitzvahs, etc., as it says in the Hirots. Okay. Now, so this is one source. As I said, there's another source which is in the Sefer Mikdash Melech. Let's scroll down. So this is a Mikdash Melech is a commentary on the Zohar, and this is in the Zohar Taf Kuf Nun Vav, I think. At any rate, he quotes here Bechelkas Bechemdas Yomim. He says to say this tefillah after the Nasi to pray for the Nishmosim, the Mitzavtzifin Kesiparin. And then he goes a little bit of an explanation. Now, for those who are not familiar, the Chemdas Yomim is a sefer. It's actually a fascinating sefer. It's one of those combination of Kabbalah and Minhag and Halacha. However, it's quite controversial. The source of the Chemdas Yomim, it's not sure who is the publisher, who's the writer, who's the author, and some say he was a follower somehow of Shabtai Tzvi, etc. And some say no. And so that in the Torah world, there's a lot of debate about the authenticity of the Chemdas Yomim. But he that's where we have it. The Mikdash Melech obviously held the Chemdas Yomim in esteem. He quotes this tefillah from there. That might also be if I said there was apprehension whether you do say or don't say this tefillah because of this attitude to that sefer. But L'Poyel by us, we are mekabel to say this tefillah. And I'd like to say one more thing. The Chemdas Yomim, he has things there, but a lot of the things which he writes were not his own inventions. For example, there are those who say, oh, the singer saying L'Dovid Hashem Oiri is first mentioned in Chemdas Yomim. Actually, there's Taka writes it, but there's an earlier source, a sefer called Shem Tov Cotton, who has the meaning of saying L'Dovid Hashem Oiri. So what I'm saying is, it may be on record. The earliest source is the Chemdas Yomim, but it's very likely that it's from an earlier source, and he just was the first one to, which we have it available to us. Kolponim, this is a little bit of the background to that tefillah of saying they are read after the Nasi, and as I said, the Sikha which you read today in Chelik Lamed Beis talks about the second part, how through this tefillah we are invoking that we should be given the merit of all the Shvatim. What we have here, another 2 points. Someone asked me, do you have to tovel a bottle stopper? A metal bottle stopper. So this is from the contemporary Sefer Psokim Utshuvas, and he writes a cover for a bottle or cup, which is made to protect it from dust. Then it doesn't need to have tvila. But if it's the bottle stopper is to protect the quality of the drink, like let's say if it's mineral water or wine, so it's not only to protect it. So here's the question: is a lid a keli? So here he's saying if the lid is merely to protect from dust, then it's not a keli. If it actually helps the food be better food, then it is considered a keli. So let's say, I just saw on another chat tonight, does a lid of a pot need to have a tevila, and do you have to tie it with a brocha? So a lid of a pot is not just to protect the food from dust, it actually is facilitating the cooking. And so therefore the answer is if it is a bottle stopper, which is actually like so protecting the food, as in the quality of the food or the drink, then it should be toveled. And yeah, he says to tovel without a bracha because of the doubt. One last thing I want to share with you, and that is about the Rebbe being mafresh challah. Now, we discussed this, I think, last week, and Rabbi Kievman of Liverpool sent me a clip of the Rebbe being mafresh challah, and I looked at it. I didn't fully understand what was going on, and therefore what I said, how he described it last week, was not accurate. And Rabbi Menachem Yunik was here last week, and I asked him in more details. Why did I ask him? Because I saw him on the video, and so I asked him how it worked. And it's very interesting, and I don't know the explanation. But he said it was very interesting how the Rebbe made a point of not just one hafrosh challah. You can see that there's several large, like these large boxes where you'd have put in 10 boxes of matzah, whatever, these very large boxes. And these were all covered with a sheet of brown paper. And the Rebbe puts his hand inside whilst the matzahs are still in their paper wrapping, and he's working hard to break off a piece of matzah whilst it's inside the box, whilst it's covered with the paper. And if someone lifted the paper to kind of make it easier for the Rebbe to, and the Rebbe kind of abruptly pulls the paper down, don't mirzach nicht. And so why did the Rebbe have to take? So he wanted to take from each box. Okay, I understand. But once all the matzahs were in a box, why was there any need for a cover over the box? The tzir of sal of a keli is more straightforward. When you don't have tzir of sal of a keli, then the Shulchan Aruch said you can cover it with a cloth. That seems to be second best. And here the Rebbe was insisting not only to have the matzahs in the box, and he struggled. There was just now published, I saw in the Edgeware weekly publication. So they had from the Derher a description of the Rebbe's Hafrosh Challah, and you can see, especially in the later years, the Rebbe is struggling to break off this piece of matzah from the packets, and yet he had this inyan of Dafka doing it in this way with a paper over it, and good. Rebbe's Cheshbainis, but I just wanted to be clear that I have had misrepresented the facts, so just the facts clearer. And so you see Melech B'Yofya Techazena Einenu, and Mavaser Hagula should be Mavaser the Geula take of Miyad. I just see here a couple of chats which I didn't notice before. So now we have here someone's asking, I use coarse salt during the year. Kosher Pesach still has black bits. Okay, black bits is Nishkan Chometz, yeah. Famous line, a woman past the Rebbe at Erev Pesach, and the Rebbe says, she says to the Rebbe, it's Erev Pesach, I'm struggling so hard, and the children aren't helping. And the Rebbe says to her, Schmutz is Nishkin Chometz, and the Kinder sind Nishkin Korban Pesach. That dirt is not Chometz, so relax on your spring cleaning, and children, don't make them the sacrifice of your frustrations. And so enjoy your Pesach, enjoy your children, Kindlach, Einiklach, and whoever you're interacting with. And so I wish you a good Tavoch and Simchas Tamid Kol Hayomim.
Good.
Amen. Yasher koyach.